Hey, this is Todd. It's been a while since I recorded a video. I know, I apologize. Just schedule's been hectic. Life has just been kicking my butt hard as far as all sorts of obligations. Unfortunately, what usually falls to the bottom of those obligations is creating videos. They just take the most time, the most effort, the most free time apart from my family, which of course, as we know, in this our new COVID reality can be difficult. But I started this new campaign a couple weeks ago, and my goals with that, as far in terms of how it impacts the channel and kind of things I do, is to create some videos about that. I want to do campaign setup, sort of campaign design type sessions, either streams where I'm actually going through it, or more diary form where I'm talking about what I've done and what I decide to do and my thought process behind that, and also these after action reports, of which this is one. I did want to get up sort of a campaign diary, but I just ran out of time, and frankly I had to rely a lot on improv for this session just because I was so far behind in the work that I wanted to do. Just to summarize, I did have another session. Basically, we had a session 0 and I posted an after action report about that. Then we had basically a session 0.5. I had created some custom classes for the two players, and there was quite a bit of customization there. So we started off with OD&D as basically our base, but I went ahead and kind of designed some character classes from the ground up, not just in terms of the abilities, but also in terms of a mechanic. I had used a spellcasting mechanic in the past for a Lamentations of the Flame Princess game that I had run. In that one, you had to roll. Essentially, we got rid of spell slots, got rid of any kind of points. Basically, you could cast spells as much as you wanted, but if you had to roll a spellcasting check, essentially a 2d6 spellcasting check, and if you failed it by enough, you would lose the spell. And if you lost the spell, it was laborious to get it back again. And you had a couple of grades of success. Well, really grades of failure. You had success. You had a failure, but you could keep casting. So, for example, if you just missed it and you knew you were close, you could spend another combat round type time frame casting it again, but then the difficulty went up. So if you really needed that spell to be cast, you could try to cast it, but your odds of failure would go up, or you could let it go. If you just let it go and it was a normal style failure, it just didn't cast. But if you failed by some margin, I forget what margin that was, you lost the spell. I was looking to do that again, but that system was a little bit fiddly. I was tracking kind of how many spells you could cast per hour and some other different things to manage. I did want some limits. I didn't want someone just spamming spells over and over again, particularly low-level ones. But that system was a bit fiddly. I was looking for ways to tweak it. I ran across an article, I think it was on an older article, I think it was on Necropraxis. If I can find the link, I'll dig it up and put it in the show notes. And it talked about having a 2d6 style roll, which I already had, so that was great. But they used a dice pool system. So you would have so many dice, you could roll a number of your dice from this dice pool. If the dice rolled low numbers, 1 or 2, they would leave your dice pool and you got them back on, essentially a long rest. We're using the 5th edition style parlance. That spoke to me. So I took my system, I kind of converted it over, so okay, great, we're going to do these spell dice. But I was thinking about it more, and I thought, and this is something I actually meant to try to look at with 5th edition, but in this case we're starting from an OSR base. I thought about, why have this just for spells? Why not have all these class abilities function off of a dice pool system? And so that's what I came up with. So I call them hero dice, I think. I have two classes. One is sort of an offshoot of a cleric called a friar. The other one is a custom dwarven magic user. They call it a stone bard. And these classes all have abilities. The friar has some different ones from the cleric, but they all work off of this dice pool mechanic. So as a character, you'll have a certain amount of dice in your pool. I think it's 3 + 1 per level, so these guys are starting off at level 1, so they have 4 dice in their pool. Some powers will just use up dice. You just spend a die to do something. That die goes into your discard pool, essentially, into your discard pile until you get it back in a long rest. And some of them, you're rolling the dice like I talked about with spellcasting, you sort of risk the die. If you're lucky, you can keep going. If you're unlucky, you're going to lose them. So you have this push and pull between how many powers you are versus how many powers you have versus how much dice you have left. Do you risk them? Do you spend them? What do you do? And I envision if these guys, their first levels, there's a good chance they're going to die if they decide to take on different classes. How some of these might work differently. I feel like there's a good way in here to really beef up fighters and avoid some of the quadratic wizard problem. Maybe not entirely, because high-level spells are just really powerful, but some ways to kind of give them some extra juice. The fighter give them some extra punch. But I thought it was interesting because you can have a varying amount of abilities, but that dice pool is going to limit how many you can use. If you have a lot of powers that are pulling dice out, that affects you if you're a caster or half caster, or a caster plus, right? Because I think because both of these classes are sort of fighter slash magic user. Fighter slash, cleric is kind of a fighter slash magic user already, and the friar is basically an offshoot of that, and then the stone bard is basically a fighter slash magic user as well. So you can give them their spell casting ability, but then if you give them other abilities that also use up dice from their pool, it's sort of a natural balance. They can try to cast a bunch of spells, they can use some of their abilities, but they can't just flood the game with both of them because it's just going to deplete their dice pool. I will probably, so if you're a patron, if you're on my Patreon, or I think I also have it up now on Gumroad, if you subscribe to either of those, I already posted up. You can see this sort of first draft of what those classes look like. I will probably at some point maybe package this together something and offer it, because I think it is interesting, and I don't know, at least it's kind of could serve as a basis of house rules, or at least options if you want to try running a game a little bit differently. But of course, they're sort of alpha stage, right? Beta is really in this game right now, and they haven't had a chance yet to get into the meat of them. So that first session 0, which I already talked about, that happened. We had the session 0.5, which I kind of went over the classes. I really wanted to impress upon them to, hey, ask me questions, look at your classes, look at their abilities, and give me your comments, right? If you have questions, let me know. If there's something unclear, let me know. If you don't like them, because I made them custom for these players, so there's no point in playing them if you don't like it. Tell me. Don't be afraid to tell me. But everyone seemed cool with it, and let me just kind of segue into some role-playing. It was pretty interesting. We only had maybe 10 or 15 minutes in the session, and these are all short sessions just because of life and everything. We're only playing about 2 hours a night. We just kind of segued into, I think we were finishing up some stuff, and then one of the guys said, oh, could we just go talk to this guy of my order? So I said, sure. So the friars, they're part of an order. This is the Order of the White Flame is what he's a part of. So sure, and we just kind of started talking it out, and then they ended the session wanting to go to the tavern to ask more stuff. They basically were asking for jobs. They went to the Viscount's keep. So they nominally, so I guess the other thing is that part of their backstories, I don't remember if I talked about this in the session 0 after report, but part of their backstories or where they came together was they work for the Viscount, and they're kind of messengers. They'll just take stuff from place to place. I had asked them if they wanted to go freeform with the structure, or if they wanted to start off with some kind of scaffolding there, because I think that having some scaffolding when you're starting out in a kind of, this is a sandbox type game, can be really helpful. They help you get your feet wet, give you some direction. So having some goalposts you can kind of set in front, some markers saying, hey, shoot for this, shoot for that, until you get comfortable. Think about it like the stairs in a swimming pool, right? You can hold on to the railing, you can get down, and then eventually you get into the deeper end in the open water, and then you feel comfortable to swim. So they opted for that scaffolding, and in this case the scaffolding was they work as these kind of messenger guys. But during that session 0.5, I wasn't ready for them to pick up a job yet. I wasn't really ready for them to leave the town yet. I didn't feel like I had something for them to do, and I didn't want them to kind of rush. So I sort of put them off and said, okay, there's stuff happening. The Viscount, they're taking the rolls. They're kind of getting ready to do their spring taxation. So there's activity there, but they're not ready to do anything yet. And when they went to their order, I said the same thing. Well, there's stuff going on, but they're not ready for you yet, so come back. So they left that session saying, okay, we're going to go to the tavern and ask around. So this session was short, mostly because I had camera issues. We're doing this on Discord, video, and audio chat. And I'm trying some different setups with the camera and everything that I'm using. And, as usual, things weren't working out right. Turned out I was using a bad cable to connect things together, so I had to figure that out. Swap the cables, got online. Then I'm putting everything in the World Anvil. I will put a link to the to the campaign and World Anvil in the show notes as well. That's where I'm going to be putting everything. So I was trying to get them on the World Anvil, make sure they were set up. They were having some trouble navigating it, and I was having trouble explaining to them, not because it's World Anvil necessarily unclear, but it can be a lot. It's sort of a busy dashboard, and if you're not used to it and it's your first time doing it, it's kind of, I think it can be easy to get lost. So that took some time to kind of get all that figured out, how to get them logged in sort of with identities and linked to the campaign, all that stuff. So that took a little bit longer. So at the end of it, we maybe lost 45 minutes or so, but I don't think it was bad. As you'll see, we stopped in a good spot, and I think it ended up being kind of a nice session, even though it was somewhat abbreviated. We started back where they left off. They're in the tavern. They're asking the bartender, different people. It was about treasure, which I wasn't expecting. When we went over in session 0, the kind of stuff that they were looking for, the kind of keywords, the feedback I was getting was sort of, high chivalry type things, Arthurian sort of high fantasy. In that, I know not high fantasy in the Lord of the Rings sense of a kind of an overarching evil power, but just sort of an, I guess, elevated fantasy. Dune, one of the players made their character Atreides. He really a fan of Dune, and I felt like there was going to be a lot of, they were going to be getting into more of the politics and the, really not doing a lot of dungeon crawling and that sort of adventuring, but really more getting into the intrigues and what's going on, different factions and their allegiances, and one of them's a part of an order, so he kind of already has a faction, and then they're also working for the Viscount, which is also another separate faction. And so I was sort of thinking that that's where they would want to go. But they go to the tavern and they're asking about treasure. Well, I thought, well, okay, this is what they want to do. I mean, that's kind of the, and it's, look, they're playing essentially a offshoot of OD&D, and OD&D is all about getting your treasure, and I did try to make sure they knew coming out of session 0 that that's how you get levels and everything, is finding loot and stuff. So hey, great. The town they're in is called Nobb's Hill, and the legend was that the forebears, the people who run this place now, killed a giant and took his home. And the giant's name is Nob, but his home was on a hill, Nobb's Hill, right? I was thinking, and I had to do a lot of improv in this one, just kind of coming up with stuff on the fly. I definitely wasn't expecting that treasure was the way they were going to go here, but I thought about it for a second. I thought, okay, well, what kind of treasure might be here? What might these people know about treasure? Because I'd hinted that the hills and people were going out, and the main mine in these hills had closed, and in fact there had been a catastrophic collapse. And actually one of the players wrote it in their backstory that kind of tied them together, how they saved each other from this collapse. And then the quarry that had part of the mine, or where the mine's kind of emptied out in this kind of quarry area, that whole quarry had filled with water and become a lake. So that was really great. So I started thinking about, okay, well, I had mentioned the hills and that there had been people who had gone prospecting out in the hills, because even though this main mine quarry area was defunct, didn't mean that there wasn't necessarily other veins of things. And the Viscount is not particularly on the ball with such things, so you could get away with trying to just kind of find your own little claim and just kind of sneak in there and get some gold and get out, or whatever, gold, minerals, whatever you want, kind of get out without anybody being the wiser. But I thought about it, and I said, okay, well, what if Nob had some treasure elsewhere, or at least that was the rumor. So that's what I went with. I said, well, there's a rumor out there that the giant Nob had his real cache of treasure was not located in the place where he was killed. So the steading on the hill that was taken from him by this warrior Gladson a long time ago, that Gladson didn't get the treasure. The treasure was still hidden somewhere else in the hills. And that was the rumor, and that people had gone out looking for it. Obviously, no one had apparently succeeded, or if they'd succeeded, they hadn't told anybody, because nobody had showed up in town with a bunch of ancient giant treasure. But that was the rumor. And then I added on top of it that, so I think they might have asked something about if anybody had any proof or material, that I think the bartender, somebody had heard that there was a map floating around, some kind of fragment map of something, but nobody had really seen it, or if anybody had seen it, they weren't talking about it, and of course, people weren't flashing it around town. But there might be a map, might be a map out there. So I floated that to them, and they were considering it. And at this point, they were a little bit, I don't want to say stuck, but something that I find can happen is that the players can try to do things and be very just sort of passive about it. So you might get one set of players that says, they hear that, okay, there's a giant, the giant's treasure might be out in the hills. Let's get a party together and we're going to go up in the hills and do some discovery. We're going to do some finding. We're going to go up there and we're going to track it, or we're going to find the signs, or we're going to do something. We're going to do that, right? Other players, of which these were more like trying to mine all this information, but they were trying to mine it in the most obvious, kind of low-level way possible, because you're not putting in a ton of work, right? The effort you're putting in, there's mental effort, which I'm glad for, is, hey, we're thinking about things, but we're just sitting in the tavern, right? We're sitting in the tavern and we're hoping that this information is going to fall in our laps. And this would be potentially very valuable information. And if you look at the value of the information versus the effort they were putting in, it's not very much. Just sitting around in the tavern and thinking that the next passerby is going to hand you a map to a treasure, A, it's wishful thinking. B, just as far as what we want to encourage on an adventure. We want to encourage go-getters, people doing things, right? So one of the things that I wanted to do with this session originally was to give them a job. I was going to have the order, give them something to take to kind of a remote little abbey, and I was going to figure out maybe something had gone wrong at the abbey, because I wanted their mission to be like, you have to put, to be given something, they have to put in a certain brother's hand, right? They have to go find an individual, particular friar, put this in their hand. So when they get there and things are awry at the abbey, they have a reason to do some investigations and poking around, because they have to put this information in this guy's hand. I hinted to them at some point where they kind of felt like they were running out of gas in the tavern, but they hadn't really decided to do anything, and they were just kind of looking like, well, is there anybody else we can ask? We've asked the bartender, we've asked that guy there who's drunk, we've asked that lady over there. Is there someone else we can ask? I went to that thing, what Matt Colville calls it, and then the orcs charge in, right? You basically give them something to push them, because they're just sitting in a tavern. I hinted, hey, do you want to go back home and wait? So I figured the next day would be when I would kick in this kind of, give them this little adventure. I was going to say, okay, you're going to sleep overnight, then in the morning they're going to bang on your door, wake you up, and say, hey, you got to take this thing. So I thought, well, do you want to just end this for the night? Because I didn't want to just force them. I didn't want to cut them short. I was basically fishing for are you guys through with this now? Do you want to move on, or do you want to kind of keep going? But they seem to be kind of interested in that. So I thought, okay, what else can I do? Now, the idea that I wanted to do, but I was going to run in the future, was I had this idea that the landslide or the cave-in from the mining collapse had exposed a dungeon area. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet. I really didn't know they would be interested in it, because, like I mentioned before, they had been seemed to be on the whole intrigue, politics, that sort of thing. And I wasn't going to force them in the dungeon, but I thought it would be neat. And it would be a way to put this place in some peril if things start coming out of this exposed dungeon entrance. That gives me something to play with. So I thought there's a lot I can do with that. But they were kind of hanging out in the tavern. Didn't seem like they were ready to leave, but there was nothing more I wanted to really reveal to them. And there wasn't really much more that they didn't have any new ideas of things to try. So I said, all right, I'm just going to do it now. So instead of having it something that was going to happen off screen, so to speak, while they were away delivering this thing to the abbey, I was going to have this happen while they were gone. I decided, I'm just going to do it now. So there's a tremor. They feel an earthquake. The whole tavern kind of shudders. Everybody freaks out. People are stumbling. They're falling. Tables, they're falling into tables, falling on the floor. Tankards of ale are crashing and spilling. People are screaming. And it stops. Then they hear a big slurping sound, like that. That was a terrible slurp I just tried, but hopefully you get the idea. Terrible slurping sound. Then there's another aftershock sort of tremor. Then it settles out. So they go, I think they even try to ask the bartender or something like, has this ever happened to you before? And the bartender looks at them like they're crazy. Like, what do you mean has this happened to me before? I don't live in an earthquake zone. No, it doesn't happen to me before. They go outside, and there are people milling about, getting their balance, and they hear, because there are people kind of coming and going, rushing around, and they hear snippets of things that seems to indicate that the filled up quarry, that quarry lake, as I called it, has vanished. And I was thinking at this point that they might just go to the quarry. I mean, that's you know, why not? But they're very cautious at first, and it's interesting because of how this ends about their cautiousness. But at first they really are not, that's like the last thing on their mind is to go to the quarry. They start wondering, well, who can they ask about it? They'd already asked the bartender before they even left the tavern about this thing that had just happened a minute ago. They don't know anything, and they don't live on a fault line, so they're not used to it. Outside they get these snippets, but they don't really ask anybody in the crowd, but then they're like, oh, let's go to the order and ask them. So I thought, okay. So they go to the order, and I have the order just, they're building this chapter house, I call it, where it's their headquarters in this little town. It's just in disarray. It hasn't fallen apart, but lots of scrolls and things have tumbled off walls. They had little pedestals where they had, you know, bric-a-brac and certain religious things were on display, and those had collapsed, and there's a whole bunch of just kind of, I don't know, low-level folk are there cleaning it up, and they walk in on the scene, and they start asking people kind of like, well, do you know, they want to talk to the kind of main guy, and I told them, it's like, you guys are you're low level. The main guy is not talking to you, right? If anything, you get, you know, 2 seconds with him, and then his secretary or somebody else you talk to. They're not going to give out a lot of time to you. Everyone else is just kind of busy, and nobody really knows what's going on. It just happened, right? No one's gotten reports yet. There's nothing to report yet. It literally has just happened. What they're trying to do now is just clean it up. They don't know what it is. That's it. So they start to kind of help cleaning it up, and I think then it dawned on them that maybe we should just go check it out ourselves. Which again, right, in real life, maybe we would be cautious. You know, a meteor lands in the woods, not everyone is crazy enough or daring enough, knowing all the horror movies and stuff, to go out and start touching it and doing things. But, you know, at some point, hey, you're adventurers, get out there and adventure. So they did finally dawn on them, oh, maybe we should go out there and actually look at it ourselves. Great. It took them a little while to reach that conclusion. And this is something that, you know, I want to not necessarily push on them, but I want to encourage them to do this kind of thing. I want to encourage them to be active. I know, and I impressed upon them, you have to be cautious. You don't want to take silly chances on things because it's OD&D, it's old, you know, it's OSR, it's very dangerous, you have very little health, it's very easy to die, but at the same time, you know, you can't do things from town, right? You have to get boots on the ground, you have to go and you have to investigate stuff, because you're never going to get treasure if you're sitting in the tavern asking everybody else what they found. You're going to be last everywhere. So good. They go up the road, they get to the crater, or they get to the quarry, and yeah, now the quarry is dry again, and there's a big hole at the bottom just going down. And he knows that some people have gone up kind of the edge of this hole, and they're throwing rocks at it and looking at it and just kind of grumbling and mumbling about what's going on and why is this happening and are we cursed or something like that. So they go up to the hole. They drop a stone down, and I didn't really do the math. I said they count up to 200 before it hits the ground, hits the water. So it's deep. And then I also told them that it's a very wide, the rim of this pit, or this hole, is very wide, but they can see at the far side that not that far down from what is the floor of the quarry, or what used to be the floor of this quarry lake, but now the floor of the quarry again, and where the pit opens up it looks like a tunnel. And it's maybe only 15 or 20 feet down, and it's just there, it just opens up into the pit, and then it just disappears. And this intrigued them. Actually, it intrigued them more than I thought it would, given the way they'd been operating up to that point, which is very, very cautious, very much waiting for other people to tell them something or show them something or something like of that nature, right? They were very much trying to look from secondhand knowledge, but this, oh, okay, they kind of, I don't know, beeline is the correct word, but they made their way in fairly short order over to that side of the rim of this pit. They used their trusty 10-foot pole, and they kind of laid on their belly and reached over to try to see if they could determine about how far down it was. And I said, yeah, it's about 15 feet. You're almost able to tap the top of it with your pole plus your arm, right? So about 15 feet. And then I wasn't sure what they were going to do. I thought maybe they'll turn around, go home, and get supplied, or maybe they'll ask more. And I was ready for them to say, okay, we go back to the order and we ask, you know, if they know anything about this or who knows about this mysterious tunnel, but they didn't. And that was a little bit of a surprise for me, because I didn't have anything prepped for the tunnel. I knew it wanted to be there. I know that in the grand scheme of things, it's there, there's things there, and I want to bring them in, but I wasn't necessarily ready for them to go down into it right this second. But that's what they wanted to do. So great. I think I grabbed, just for kind of quick reference, a Dyson Logos map that kind of matched a little bit of what I had, just so I could have it. and they tied the rope off, and they tied down, and first went the dwarf, started checking it out, and he asked right away, hey, does this seem like a mining tunnel, or what does it look like? I said, no, it seems very different than a mining tunnel. It seems he used the dwarf, so I told him how reminiscent it was of dwarf work. It could even be dwarf work potentially, but definitely it's of good design and craft, certainly not the kind of rough-hewn, just kind of get things done dirty that a mining tunnel is like. Soon the other one, Atreides, came down and joined him, and Atreides started tying knots in the rope to make it a little bit easier to climb up and down. I told him, I said, I'm not making you roll to climb and to kind of go down the rope and swing in here. I said, because there's no time constraints, nothing's chasing you, there's nothing bad happening, so you're gonna get that as a freebie. But I did tell them, I said, if something is chasing you, so for example, you're trying to come out at speed from that tunnel and you need to clamber up that rope and get out, then you're gonna have rolls. So I think having that in the back of their mind, I thought, what can we do to make anything, any rolls we have to make, any tests we're gonna have to do with this rope a little bit easier, let's tie some knots into it. Good thinking. So the dwarf, he's checking the walls sort of for traps. He's kind of doing an all-around check. So I just basically said, okay, every 10 feet you move, basically 10 by 10 is gonna take you about 10 minutes to do. So after about a half hour, he'd moved down about 30 feet, checking it out. I tried to explain to him, I'm not sure I did a great job, that essentially this tunnel is like going into, as if a building had been cracked in half and you're just entering a random hallway, right? It's not an entrance. This is not somewhere you're expected to enter. It's just, this is the part that, the pit interrupted. Whatever structure you're in, the pit just interrupts it. But there wasn't any traps, just very well done. And again, I was constantly waiting for, okay, I think any moment now they're going to want to turn back and go do research or do something else, because just that's the impression they had given me for the first bit of gaming we'd done. But that's not what they did. They took out, so first they were using a torch, then they took out their lantern, tied it to the 10-foot pole so they could push it ahead of them, and then started to make their way down the tunnel. And by this point, we'd basically come out to the, we started, again, everything with World Anvil and all kind of the extra setup that I had to do. We were about at the end point of the night. So I basically said that, hey, they moved down the tunnel and now they could tell that it was opening up into kind of a wider, but still that the lantern light hadn't hit it yet, sort of darkness. But it seems that the hallway's opening up into something, and that's where I ended it. So I thought it was a good session. I thought that their evolution was interesting because they started off being really ready to kind of run things from the back seat, right? Let me go ask everybody I know about something, and we're not really going to act on anything until we know. It seemed to be how they were starting. I thought they were going to be more into the intrigue part, but they weren't. And then they found this opening, and now look, there's a part of it is, I think it is something that I've talked about in other videos, something that runs into that, this idea that you understand on a meta level, or you think you understand what the GM's trying to do. So when the GM presents an obvious call to adventure, an obvious adventure hook, plot hook, it's normal for the players to kind of jump at it because they know, oh, here's the thing that the GM wants us to do. So here I have this hole opens up and there's a tunnel in the hole that they may very well have thought, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. Now for me, that's not what I meant. I would have been perfectly happy if they had said, hey, we'll sleep on it. And then I would have introduced that other plot line, that other possibility, that other task for them to do. And they could have decided to do that. They could have decided to do the pit like they did. They could have decided that, can someone else do this? We're going to beg out, we're sick, and we're going to go in the hills and see if we can find the hill giant's treasure. I would have been open to all of it. So I don't know if I'm really getting a sense of their behavior yet. These are players I haven't played with before, so I really don't know them. So a lot of these sessions, particularly these early ones, I'm really going to be getting to know them as they're getting to know me and kind of what kind of things they're apt to do. So it was a surprise, but it was a nice surprise because I had meant to introduce that. I always kind of like dungeon crawling, at least a little bit. I haven't really played or run a lot of mega dungeons. I always feel like they must get, again, having not played them, they just feel like, man, just the boredom must set in at some point, just being in a single dungeon for a ton of time. So this is not going to be necessarily a mega dungeon, but we'll see how they take to it. There are certain types of dungeons I've always wanted to kind of run. I know that kind of, I guess the classic Castle Greyhawk or Caverns of Thracia type dungeons do appeal to me. It's more, when I think of the mega dungeon, I think of more of like Undermountain, where it's just level upon level upon level kind of forever. Whereas if you look at something like Caverns of Thracia, they're really different characteristics, different levels. They really have character all their own. I mean, maybe Undermountain does too. I don't know that much about it, actually. It was kind of, we never got into it in my playing days, and I think I remember I might have had one of the box sets, but I have very hazy memories of it. So I apologize if I've offended anybody who is a fan of Undermountain. So we'll see. We'll see if they stick with it. I'm curious how deep they'll go. They don't really have a great idea. These guys have not played old school dungeons before. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach it. Right now they're playing it pretty smart in their own way. Right? I don't know, the lantern on the pole is an interesting trick. It does help give you some extra, you know, you could distance seeing wise, but of course it also means that your light source is ahead of you, so things are going to see you before you potentially see them. But I did roll for one random encounter check and they passed. No encounter yet. And I'll have this week to flesh out this dungeon. I don't know if I will draw up my own map or if I will continue to use the Dyson Logos map. We'll see. If I draw it, I will post it probably to my Patreon, so you can check it out. I'm trying to think if I have any other thoughts about it. I thought I was successful. I wish I had prepared a bit more, but I feel fairly comfortable. I always feel like with the improv, it's always easier, at least for me, when I understand the things that are around and what's going on. And in this case, I have put enough thought energy into this area and what's going on that I know there are things there. Now I just kind of have to flesh it out a little bit, and then I can fill it in later. So that's kind of what I did here, because I knew the kind of things that were around. Wasn't maybe expecting them to go into this thing right now, but I'm ready for it since they have chosen. Hopefully I will get to a campaign prep style video about the next session before we get there, and then after that I will try to be on some kind of schedule with doing these kind of videos. I do have some other videos that I'm prepping to try to get ready when I can. I do want to talk about the move towards diversity in D&D. They posted a piece about that and about sort of doing away with some of the sort of well-established tropes about monsters and things. I do want to talk about that because I think it is somewhat of a big deal. I mean, yes, it's a corporation, so you know I'm not going to put them on a pedestal for doing it, but I think it's a good move. But I'll do a video about that, and I have some other things too. So there's more to come, but that's my after action report for the official session 1. Again, if you want to see more and read more about what I'm doing and sort of the lore of that world as I build it, there's that link to the World Anvil location, where I'm going to be storing everything, so you'll be able to see it. I think on Patreon, if you're the higher level of subscriber to Patreon, you'll get some more behind the scenes, more higher level access if you want it to things that are kind of upcoming. I've just started all this, so it's a little bit bare bones, but I am going to be filling it in over time and putting written session reports there and all that kind of stuff. So feel free to follow it if you're interested in that. But other than that, stay healthy, and I will talk to you later.